This is another episode of Standup Comedy, your host and MC, celebrating 40-plus years on the fringe of show business. Stories, interviews, and comedy sets from the famous and not so famous. Here's your host and MC, Scott Edwards.
Hi, and welcome to this week's show. We have a special guest, and not only a terrific comic, but a longtime friend. You've seen him on Evening at the Improv. He's been on Showtime. He's done hundreds of clubs, corporate events, cruise lines. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce one of my best friends in the business, Steve Bruner.
Hey.
Wow, the crowd goes
Scott,
nuts, Steve. So nice to have you on the podcast this week. I think I've been looking forward to this ever since I started. There's certain people I know in the industry that I think of more as more than just comics, but friends and people that grew up in the industry with me. And you're one of those.
Thanks. Oh, I appreciate that, Scott. Thank you very much. I do have a question. Are there any non-special guests you have on the? We're looking forward to our special guest today. We're looking forward to our less than. This is all we could get this week.
Yeah,
I like being a special guest. That's nice.
Exactly. Well, whenever I can get somebody of your caliber of comedy on the podcast, it's special.
I'm the most famous person in my house. That's the best. Because I live in my hometown. I moved back about a year and a half ago to my hometown, and I run into people from high school and heck, from kindergarten just when I go out to buy cream. And a couple of the people, it's kind of funny that, you know, I'm not famous or anything. They're like, "Hey, I heard you were doing comedy. You did pretty well. What's going, you know, I guess you never made it to be famous." And I never knew what to say. And
they actually say, Teresa, "Well, you're not famous, but we know you did it."
Yeah. Well, but we know you're funny or something. And Teresa goes, "Oh, my wife Teresa came up with just such a great thing to say when somebody's subtly putting you down or whatever, and you're not a household name, but you're in the business." She goes, "Oh, yes, he's not famous, but he's so successfyou." And I just went, "Oh, that's really nice. Thank you."
And you know what, Steve? That's actually, Teresa had nailed it, because you
Yeah.
are one of the top professional, ongoing, I mean, decade after decade. I bet I can list on two hands the people that got their start in the clubs and are still performing regularly. In fact, you and I just did a gig recently. So,
Yeah.
I mean, are still going strong. But let's lead into the podcast with that.
Well, if you don't know any better, sure. If you don't know any better to quit, then you're still here. That's what I say.
Well, let's let the audience know, how did you end up being a comic?
Well, I'd always been writing jokes for a very, very long time. I got some laughs early on in my life. A mistake in a play called Oklahoma, where a kid was teaching an older kid was teaching the younger kids how to play poker. And he basically was relieving them of their lunch money is what he was doing. But, and he had all this change in his pockets, and we were doing a performance of Oklahoma, and he's carried off stage and he drops all this change out of his pants pocket. And I bend down to pick it up, because I'm like, "Oh my goodness, he's losing all this money." I totally have no idea there's an audience there.
Right.
And it, in the somber death scene, it gets this huge, huge laugh. and I'm like, "Oh, I don't know what drug this is, but I'm digging it so much so." And that sort of gave me a, wow, I really like the sound of that, the feeling of that. And I was probably picking up the change slower after I heard the laugh. And I'd always write stuff down that people would say. And in high school, I don't know where we've ever talked about this, but I was like 5'2" when I graduated high school. So
wow.
I was a very short,
Yeah, you're taller now.
So, yeah, I am. Thanks. Yeah, I grew like 3 days after I graduated high school. People would say I hung out with very funny people, and they'd say things, and I'd be like, "Man, that's funny. I'm going to write it down." And at a high school party one time, there was a big group, and I said, "Oh, hey, remember when so-and-so did such and such?" And it got a huge response. And one of the cool guys in high school said, "You know, I was there when that happened. It wasn't nearly as funny as the way you say it was. You made him look good. You made her look good. You made it funny. Everybody loved it. Yeah, I think you got something here. And I just kept that notebook that I wrote funny things down, and I sort of learned how to order material so the punchline was at the end.
And you got a little early validation, it sounds like.
Yes, for being a short guy, being funny was my in, and it helped. So got a validation, and then in college I entered a couple little talent shows and got noticed. I just went up and read out of the notebook out of things I had written, and it worked. In second grade, I wanted to be a comedian. So
wow.
There's a little report in second grade. When I grow up, I want to be a comedian.
Yeah, there's something to be said for living out your life dream and being a success like you have. So that's interesting. I didn't know that story. And
there
now,
you go.
how did that lead into
did you just want stories you knew? I'm sorry.
No, it's great. I love learning. So how did that lead to us meeting and you working at Laughs Unlimited?
Graduated college because I did think comics starve. And so I thought, well, you're going to need, something to make money, and you're just going to be doing comedy for fun. And maybe if it turns into profit, hot diggity. But after college, I moved in with a bunch of fellas from high school.
Now,
and
I'm going to interrupt. I want to interrupt.
Yeah.
What'd you graduate with degree-wise?
Oh, what are you, my dad? I graduated with a degree in economics and a degree in political science, or those were my majors. I don't know the difference between majors and degrees, and then I did get a minor in speech. So I'm using the minor in speech. That's what I always told my dad. I am using my minor in speech. Thanks for paying for most of my college.
No, but I tell people, I used to give advice to young comics all the time. And just like you said, there's very few people that float to the top, the cream of the crop, that make the money necessary to have a living in any type of entertainment, especially comedy. And I used to give people advice that, have a backup plan. And the fact that you had a degree in business or political science at least showed, one, that you used your brain, that you were smart. But I mean, I would have given you that same advice if I had met you in college. Finish what you're doing, have that as a backup, go for your dream, but have a backup plan. So that's interesting. So then,
it helped. It helped for sure because econ, I learned how to sort of invest in stocks, and I sort of knew that there was a little. You should live on less than you make, which my first years of comedy was very good advice. I starved a little bit, but anyway, then one of the fellas named Eric moved to San Francisco because he wanted to go into modeling. He was a real good looking kid. And he said, I don't think I can afford to live there by myself. Would you consider coming down? And I said, time to put up or shut up about, being a comedian. So he moved to San Francisco, found a place. I moved in a little bit later and started doing stand-up, did a bunch of open mics.
Were you doing like the zoo and Cobb's?
My first paid gig was the Holy City Zoo. Very proud of that. $12.20.
Wow.
And then there were competitions around the Bay Area, of which you had one. I think it was called the Great Northern Laugh Off or something like that.
Great Northern California Comedy Competition, yes.
Okay. And I did one of those. I made it to 8th place. Although Lamont Ferguson, good friend of mine, says, no, I was 8th in that. And we were basically, we made it to the finals, but we're in way over our head. But we became great friends because we were starting out. So like I got 7th or 8th. And the prize for getting 7th or 8th was a week at Laughs Unlimited.
Not a bad prize.
And not a bad prize. And I remember my first week was you had Birdcage at that point. I worked Birdcage with, I had her name on the front of, and she gave me some real solid comedy advice. Joanne Deering was my first headliner. And
very funny young lady.
She listened. She's fabulous. She had a TV show there for a while. She hosted a TV show. But she said she listened to her tape after every show. I spent, half my weekly wage there going to buy a recorder. I listened to my stuff, and she helped go over a couple jokes I think I only had probably 8 jokes at that time, but so she didn't really have to help edit too long. But I got better and better. And the funny thing is, Scott, you thought I was too nice of a guy to hire me back. And I came in to laugh, and I was told, yeah, go down there, get paid, and get your other weeks. And you said, I heard you were funny, but you're too nice a guy. This business is gonna, nice guys, it's gonna eat you up. And so, come back with a little more seasoning. And I think I said, man, you're a jerk.
Well, I did.
I heard, and then you said, oh, okay, I'll give you another week, And so it was kind of like if I stood up for myself, you hired me again.
Well, I did take.
That was our
that's an interesting, and I appreciate you. And of course, I don't remember any of that, but I think it points out something that was very true, and that was that I took my job as a comedy club, which we weren't Vegas, we weren't TV shows, but we also weren't high school gigs. We're part of the training program, and I took my job seriously on telling people honestly if they had an opportunity or not. And I'm not sure I was right 100% of the time, but I would on a regular basis sit people down and say, look, you're good, but you need to do this and this and this, or you're not good, and here's why you need to keep that degree going. And you are one of the nicest guys in comedy.
Oh, well, thanks. I appreciated it, and I had a little schooling in San Francisco where there was a guy, very talented comic, at open mics after your show. He would come up, didn't matter if he had a good show or a bad show. He would come up and say, quit now, you suck.
No.
And I mean, it didn't matter. And I saw him do it to a couple other comics who were like, yeah, I got it. And he was just being the kind of bully of the open mic system. And when he came to me with the same tone, I'm like, no, I don't. No, I'm in this. You can't bully me out. And he goes, and as soon as you said that, he said, all right, stick-to-itiveness. That's what we need in this business. So I had a little taste of somebody who just kind of bristled up and said, look, this ain't a sissy game. It's a mean, hard business. I've slept in my car to get the hotel money that some clubs gave you because I wanted to make a living at it, and it's not for shrinking violets. And I don't think you have to be mean, but I think you have to have a little, toughness of show business has thrown a lot of people out because they just didn't like to deal with the business part. And I agree that that's not the fun part, but the rush of the stage and writing the material like I've been doing for a while now is just so joyful. I'm so lucky. I just feel lucky.
They were, and I would have had similar advice for people, but it is being a road comic has to be one of the toughest existences in business, because it's not just the difficulty of show business and trying to be that 0.5% that make it to stardom. It's the grind day after day, week after week, being on the road.
I didn't know it was a grind. I didn't know it was a grind when I was doing it because I had so much fun. I mean, me and Bob Ettinger back in the day. Bob Ettinger and I did 10 states in 10 days, 5,000 miles. Him driving 5 hours, me driving 5 hours. I mean, crazy stuff that I couldn't possibly do now. But we were so excited, and 2 comics, and we wrote during that. Hey, what do you think about this idea? What do you think about that idea? It was like an office.
Well, you bonded over and you were bonding over the experience because it was a shared experience.
And we couldn't have been making. I mean, I made enough to cover rent, and there were meals. I used to drive places just for a spaghetti dinner. But the best part about working with Bob is I'm not a druggie, or I've never got involved in that realm. As I say, I'm too cheap for rehab. So, but it was nice to work with another comic because when we were driving through Colorado, we got pulled over by the police because we're driving at 2:00 at night, and the cop comes over. It's snowing, and he's like, "All right, you guys from California, this is a drug run. We're going to bring the dog in to smell your car." And Bob turns to me and goes, "Man, I'm glad I'm working with you because I can't think of 5 other comics that I'd trust in this situation that the dog wasn't going to find some drugs."
It's so funny that
and real quick, the police officer, we had to turn our car off, and the cop the policeman had his car still on. And I said, "Hey, while we're waiting for the dog, it's snowing. Can we get in the back of your car?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "Your car, you got your heater on. Can we go with?" And he knew that no drug smugglers or guys wanted to get in the back of a police car. And so he goes, "Oh, you guys, because we had cash. We emptied our pockets. We had just been paid. We had cash. We were from California. We had a rental car. I mean, we looked, I guess, I don't look like I don't know what a drug, I look like a good mule is what I look like."
I would have never thought of you that way.
He called the drug dogs off because we asked to get in the back of the police car. Just for heat.
Well, I think that's a great story. Yeah. Oh, that's hilarious.
Thanks. It's true, Bob. We're happy to have traveled together.
Oh, that is so great. And you alluded to something earlier I wanted to roll back on, and that is that unlike magic and juggling and a couple other aspects of entertainment, one of the things I was always aware of and happy about, and I've heard on this podcast over and over, is that the more mature, successful comics have no problem normally in giving advice and helping young comics. Magicians are very competitive. Jugglers can be competitive. Actors, models, they can all be very competitive.
Okay.
And I'm sure there's some comics that fear other comics' quality on stage, but most of the stories I've heard, like you mentioned, Joanne Deering giving you advice.
Yep.
I've heard that over and over again, and I think it's kind of a proud point of the comedy, at least the stand-up comedy industry, is that the seasoned professionals have no problem in giving advice to somebody that's up and coming. There's a more of a camaraderie.
I think there's an ego. That's definitely true in the San Francisco realm that I started out with. They was the most supportive group of people. I did 2 shows at the Holy City Zoo. My first show was an open mic, and they put the new people up front because they just said, "Yeah, you shouldn't wait around." The new guys went on first. Let's see what you have, a trial of fire. And I had fun my first time going up. It wasn't horrible. I didn't get many laughs, but I think I was deaf to the laugh. I wouldn't have known what a good laugh was anyway. If I got half a laugh, I was thrilled. And the second time I went up, they go, "Oh, you've been here before. You know what it is." And I ended up almost going last at 1:30 in the morning because I didn't know there was a dues paying. That's what it was. You pay your dues. And I did horribly, as you can imagine, a beginning comic at 1:30. And I couldn't. I had stage fright after that for a period of about a month, and I avoided the going up on stage, even though I had moved there to do comedy. I was like. And when I finally got up the gumption to go again, a bunch of the people that had seen me the first 2 weeks, "Where you been? What are you doing?" They had worried about me that I was gone, and they welcomed me back with open arms. There were people that went out after and wrote. In LA, when I had moved there, it was a little more competitive, but man, in the early 90s in San Francisco, it was a wonderful schooling community. People like Mike Dugan gave advice freely. Jim Samuels had a comedy class that he'd look at your tape, and I think it was $5. He'd look at your tape and give you his advice. And after about 2 months, about 5 tapes worth, he goes, "I'm not giving you any more advice. It's good." And from that point on, I submitted the tape to get gigs.
Good for you.
It was super. It was a super wonderful community. There was one guy I was opening for, and I was so bold. People were giving me advice. that I said, hey, I think this joke that you do, they're laughing too early. I think if you put this word at the end, and he looked at me, I had been doing comedy for, 8 months or something. He's like, about a year later, when I was a middle act and a little stronger and kind of pushing him a little harder. And he said, wow, that's a great idea. And so I knew I had been right. It was mostly one way. You give to the new people the ideas, and you don't, and yet I was kind of barking up the tree saying, hey, I have an idea for you. And it created a lot of nice, hey, this guy will give you a suggestion if he has it. I mean, some of my suggestions are worthless, but I wanted to tell them I was all open for whatever they ever wanted to give me. So.
Well, in an analogy of what you're talking about happened to me all the time as the club owner, because I never called myself a comic, never tried to do pure stand-up. I mean, some people would say I spent way too much time on stage for not having an act. But I think what you were alluding to, and I think it's a truism, is that certain people have an ear for comedy on what works, what won't work, in the right timing and verbiage to make something better. And I often would give my advice to comics, not always heated and maybe not always right, but I have a good ear for comedy, even though I don't perform it. And I was not shy because I was the boss in
you're
sharing
not
my opinions.
Because you're you.
Well, let's backtrack a little bit, because I wanted to touch on something that you mentioned a few minutes ago that I think is really true, in that you are a clean comic. Now, not only a nice guy, and like I said, I was warning you about the industry, so you're a nice guy, but you're also one of the rare breed of ultra clean comics. And you have maintained that for 4 decades of entertainment, or 3 decades of entertainment. Not trying to age you.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
But you mentioned being at the zoo or Cobb's and doing a set at 1 or 1:30 in the morning when the people are a little drunker and they're a little crazier, and they're always had somebody dirtier up in front of you. I was just going to say, can you explain the challenges of being a clean comic in that situation?
I don't know. It never, it's not like I don't know the swear words. It's not like when I hammer my thumb that I don't have a good working usage of that vocabulary. But I just never thought it was as, I saw some guys when I was just thinking about the doing it. And I saw San Francisco comedy competition. I saw A. Whitney Brown, and I saw a guy named Frank Prinzi open for Dr. Gonzo. And some of the people that impressed me most weren't using vulgarity or swear words to punctuate their jokes. They just were good jokes. And I went,
cheap out.
Well, yeah, I see that there's an effect. If you grew up with that conversation, I heard my dad swear twice my entire life. And also my grandmother, not to sound sweet Polly purebred, but my grandmother threatened to come to almost every show I did in the area, and I never wanted her to be embarrassed about the material that I did. And I just didn't grow up with that kind of language. And so I wrote with that idea that if the joke needs it, it's probably not as good a joke as I can make it. And yeah, it was somewhat hard. It's hard to sometimes climb out of the gutter if
it's hard to get the audience to climb out of the gutter.
Yeah, but here's the best part about it that I accidentally found. There were a couple acts that had gigs around, the California or the near states that wanted me to be on the bill ahead of them, because then when they did drop the F-bomb or whatever, it was a shock to the audience, as opposed to some other acts that just threw it in gratuitously so that they could break that ice. So a couple guys got me a ton of work because I set what I would call a good table. I set a good table up in front of them.
That's a great expression.
And man, it paid my rent. I mean, they were like, okay, and I always had enough material to where one thing that, it wasn't always great material, but I'd say, hey, is there anything that you need? I wanted to facilitate the headline show. They're the ones that are doing 45 minutes to an hour. What do you need me to leave out? You've seen my act. What do you need me to leave out? Because I'm only doing 25 minutes and I got 35, so I can play. And some people were trying out a new bit that I might have been stepping on with a car routine or an airline routine or whatever. And the idea of me dancing around it and being clean got me so much work that,
I think
it was a good decision. It was a good decision. It wasn't something that I planned out. It's how I run.
No, but it's a tribute to your how you go into this business. You're not being competitive. Your ego's not involved. You're doing what's best for the show, and that's.
Well, I tried.
No, but that's so true. Kermit Apio has done a lot of traveling, opening up in concerts because
great guy. Yeah,
the entertainers know he's going to do the right time and it's going to be clean. So whatever they're going to do after is going to shine even more. And you're the epitome of that.
Well, he's a good friend of mine and such a great act. And we've talked over material and told some old war stories and such that I like knowing those kind of guys. And and then when there were other people that wanted to say, hey, is there anything that you need to dance around? It came back to me, guys in front of me. Of course, there were the guys that were trying to be headliner, so they'd try to make it pretty hard in the middle spot. They'd step on your stuff maybe on purpose or just to show their wares, basically. And I was always happy that when somebody said, hey, do I need to? No, do your act. Part of my job as a headliner is to have enough stuff. But I appreciated those guys that asked. If I was trying to tape a certain piece that was trying to get on TV or something like that. But the other thing about being clean, and this happened at your club, I co-headlined at your club with somebody, and they were pretty upset that I was closing some nights over them, and a TV person. We had both been on a TV audition, and I got called back, and they didn't understand it because they were getting a better response from the crowd than my monology was. And I said, well, I got called back on the TV thing because you were doing your act and I was doing my act, and they had two clipboards, stuff you can do on TV and stuff you can't do on TV. And at the end of the night, they only had one clipboard for me, and I was writing to get on TV, and he changed a couple bits. We talked about after he realized I wasn't going to get upset that he was, a couple nights he blew me off the stage because the people wanted the bigger comedy with the music and the language. I do what I do. I'm not trying to play baseball if I'm a good soccer player.
And you put a point.
Terrible analogy,
but you put a point on something that I've always believed, and I told comics from the day I opened my doors at the club, is that I always preferred clean comics, and I knew that the guys that made it, Leno, Carvey, Seinfeld, Shandling, you could go on and on and on.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
That they had to work. They could be dirty if they needed to. If it was a Friday night late show and the audience needed it, they could get a little risque to meet that audience need. They could adapt.
Sure.
But their general act was clean, and that was one of the reasons they were able to go do the Merv Griffin show and the Mike Douglas show and the Tonight Show, was that they had
all people that
sets.
I loved to laugh at, and I could laugh at him. I found my dad, my folks' Shelley Berman album, from the early 60s. And I'm like, what is this? My folks, my stoic parents have a comedy album. And I listened to it and I loved it. I loved it because it told a story. Audiences were different when I got in because they weren't going to wait 3 minutes for a premise to be acted out. They needed a little more fast food when I got in. You needed a few more, I think, jokes, but to listen to that stuff, the well-written material that had a beginning, a middle, and an end was such a good school for me to that's what I wanted to kind of do. And they didn't swear. I didn't really hear until much later, the Red Fox party albums or anything like that. So
no,
but
I think
I was schooled in.
It does make a point. Well, tell you what, let's share with the podcast audience what a solid, clean entertainer sounds like. I have a 4-minute set here that we recorded in the 80s and then released it in our 20th anniversary CD.
Oh my goodness!
Now this is
the Wayback Machine.
Yeah, this is some early material of yours. So let's go to that right now, everybody. This is
crank up the reel-to-reel, Scott.
Everybody, this is Steve Bruner live on stage at Laughs Unlimited, sometime in the mid '80s. Here you go.
All righty.
A Western not too long ago, one of these things where the cavalry comes in to save the day. Realized the hardest job in the entire world had to be the bugler in the cavalry. He led every single charge in the battle. If there's anything you don't want to be, it's a target making noise. He's just leading his old friends right into the fray, playing his little tune. What were the words to this song? I'm over here without a gun. Shoot me first. I hit my recruiter. Like it's not a hard enough job just playing bugle. It's a hard instrument to play. This guy is trying to play it while riding a horse. Like that wouldn't be the toughest job combination. I hope he had a good dental plan. That's it. Before I joined the cavalry, they used to call me Bucky. And we had a lot of musical instruments leading the charge into battles, like the Scottish Army had the bagpipe player. He was definitely shot first. Usually by his own men. Stuck that in. Tough jobs are everywhere. I think it's got to be a tough job to be doctor, because everybody's nervous about going to the doctor. Figured out why I was so nervous last time I went. It's because they give you that little form that says name, address, phone number. Then line 4 says, in case of emergency. Who do you want us to notify? Perhaps the doctor. I guess if he doesn't know what to do, I should put down coroner. Shouldn't I? This last flight across the country, she actually said, as part of her safety speech, in case of an unscheduled landing. Code word, crash. In case of an unscheduled landing, file out in an orderly fashion. Did you not see us trying to get on the plane? We couldn't manage to get on this sucker in an orderly fashion. We boarded this plane like it was the last chopper out of Saigon. Now you're going to factor death into the equation. And they've made flying uncomfortable for a lot of people now. They've outlawed smoking on airplanes. You think that's a good idea? Yeah, people kind of applaud that. The no people never applaud anything. Too busy gasping for breath. It's like, I'd kick your butt if I had the lung capacity. So I think they should still have separate sections. Maybe not smoking and non-smoking, but something to separate us, like withdrawing and non-withdrawing. That way, for a 7-hour flight, I wouldn't have to sit next to Mr. Fidgety, who's being forced to quit. Because you realize in the very first minute you sit next to him, it's going to be a very long flight for both of you. You know I can't smoke. Shoot on my gun, you don't have an ashtray I could lick or anything like that. Once you're in the area, he's bothering the stewardess. Ding, 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 ding. Is there any place I can smoke or they're having a problem here? Is there like a door to the wing? Maybe a window rolls down or something I can just talk to you. How about the bathroom? Is the bathroom, it's a felony? Oh God, I hate to be in Sing Sing. What are you in for? Smoking in the boys' room? I used to, until this last flight, I used to worry about a terrorist hijacker. Not anymore. Now I'm worried about some guy in the midst of a nicotine fit. All right, just land the damn thing. Put it down. Somewhere near North Carolina, they grow tobacco there. Hey, I don't start smoking, we all start smoking. Get what I mean?
You know, that's old material, but it still works. What's interesting is that that bit ends with smoking on a plane, which,
Right.
you know, back in the 80s was still a thing where you had smoking
Yep.
sections, which made no sense. There was a time that we had a smoking section in the club. The smoke is still there.
Oh,
But
sure. From what I understand, it doesn't take direction.
Right.
So,
and
that's
what's
right.
funny is if you were under 30 now, or under 20 for sure, the idea of smoking at all should not be good. But smoking in a plane would never have even come up. And here it's a concept on your bit. Great
Yeah.
set, by the way.
Oh, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. I remember doing that material. I had to change it to no smoking, like an anti-smoking idea in general. Hey, remember when they used to smoke this? And I remember working Tennessee, and I'm going into the note, sort of against smoking idea, and almost everyone in the audience at the same time was inhaling, so that these little cherries lit up the whole room on their cigarettes. And I was like, oh, I better drop this material. It was like a second spotlight.
Oh, that's a great image. A bunch of
Oh, it was
cherries out in the
crazy.
audience.
Oh, it was amazing.
I
I'm like,
love
what
that
is that
visual.
bright light? And they were all doing it at once. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm in Tennessee. This is pro tobacco
This is
country. I better
smoking area.
I better stop it.
Oh, that's hilarious. Well, the other thing was you opened that set with one of the bits that I always attribute to you because it was your
Yeah.
opening set for years, and that was the
yeah.
the bugler. And the
great
guys
job.
that start off
tough job.
Oh, tough job. But anyway, I mean, that set, that opening bit and the smoking
I
bit.
still do that joke every now and again. I like that. When there's kids in the crowd, like when I do a cruise ship and there's an early show, because it has a sound effect, even though I'm not as good as our friend Carlos Alzraki and such with sound effects. It's one of the only sound effects I have.
You're right. Well, anyway,
Kids like it.
very solid entertainment. And what I like about doing this podcast is I'm bringing up live on stage material from the 80s and the 90s. And yeah, there's an occasional reference to Reagan or something back in the day. But the material stands. It's still funny. And I think
good.
that
Well,
is,
thanks.
it's like watching an old Lucille Ball or Dick Van Dyke show. The material works no matter what generation.
That must have been, I would say, instead of mid-'80s, because I started 87, 88 and got
late
in.
80s.
Yeah, good.
Okay.
I was like, okay, maybe I was funnier earlier than I thought.
I'm a lot older than you, so it's harder. Hey, I do want to use that to transition to another question, because we've talked about the benefit and the challenges of being a clean comic. I mentioned in your intro that you've done clubs from coast to coast, but more importantly, you're a very successful corporate comic. You've done a lot of corporate works, and you do a lot of cruise ships.
I do.
Being clean.
Where
being clean is important. But I did want to ask you, the audiences have changed from the 90s to 2020, and you're still a working performer. We just did a gig together recently. You still rock the audiences.
Thank you.
But when you're out working, and I know you do less clubs. I don't even know if you do any clubs, but even on the cruise ships and corporate, the comedy audience has changed. And I'll give you one quick reference. You mentioned earlier that in the early days, people would allow time for a setup before a punchline.
Right.
And then in the 80s and 90s, that setup time you alluded to, you mentioned, had to be shorter. Now it's infinite. I mean, it's like such a small amount of time people have patience for in this world of instant gratification. They don't. A lot of times, I'll give you a good story. Larry Miller, one of the funniest comics ever,
hilarious,
told story bits that could sometimes take 10, 12 minutes. Now they're
his
funny.
Singing material and all that. Oh God, legendary.
Legendary.
I went to,
But would it work in today's audience? What challenges have you found, or have you?
Well, sure. I have to. I mean, I write some one-liners that I put up front in my act so that they know that I'm funny right away. However, there are a couple acts that I am just so whatever the positive word, jealous or envious or respected. They're like George Wallace. He knows he's funny, and he will talk for 3 minutes before the first laugh. But the people that come to see him, he's a legend. And it's a little different when you have a name on the marquee that people are coming to see, which is one of the reasons I actually really enjoyed your club. It was kind of a unique thing at some point during my career of club work. Your club was a comedy club. You didn't paper the room. People came to see comedy, as opposed to it moved to a different business model in the middle of the 90s, or I don't know when.
Like an old disco becoming, yeah. And people would paper the room, and it didn't matter. You got the butts in the seats, and those people then would be buying drinks, whereas you had a cover charge. And people, I think, as I recall, you pressed them to buy the not so macho nachos. But, good memory.
But they could sit there and we paid for a comedy room, and so they were there for the art form or whatever. And then when it got to a paper room, it got to a different group of people, and it was a little harder. Now you're competing with cell phones. Somebody's cell phone goes off. Or it doesn't even ring, but they note it and they need to text their friend back or their babysitter. They have their own lives. I think it is a little harder in some ways, but there's also more availability. More people see my little 1 minute Bruner breaks that I put out every 3 weeks from a taped show, and just a little bit that lasts about a minute. More people see those than I've performed in front of. I did a thing called Dry Bar that one little 3 minute piece got, 5 million people to watch. That's probably as many people as I've performed.
Wow, that's
in front
great.
Of
there's less people on this podcast.
Well, there is now, but when they look in the archive, but it's a weirder, listen, you got to change. I'm old school. I could probably use a typewriter instead of a computer better. It's different. I'm not an adapting comedian. I just write what I think is funny, and I find enough audiences that think it's funny to pay my mortgage. And I've always lived on less than I've made. So if anything happens, I'm going to be fine. I'm very lucky.
Well, you're lucky. Truly a success when it comes to stand-up comedy, a road comic, corporates. Yay. Clubs, cruises. You've even done some bits on TV, so congratulations. And I want to say thanks for doing this podcast. It was a real joy.
Oh, this was fun, Scott. It's nice to catch up with you and talk about the good old days and the days yet to come. And I appreciate the comedy the people you've introduced me to by being on your shows. You had a good eye for good folks. Some of my best friends I met at Laugh Unlimited, Stan Sellers. It was a guy that we were both, I opened, he was the middle. I know the headliner from that week. I mean, it was a real pure comedy experience for a real wonderful time in my life. And I've already done the interview, so I don't need to blow smoke, but it was a great run of clubs. I had fun, and you ran a good show. And you did do too long sometimes, but that's just between us.
Well, I appreciate the kind words, but it was a team effort. I think that I came along at the right time, opened up the right kind of venue. By the way, I was the only club that never had a 2-drink minimum, because to me it was all about the comedy. Having entertainers like you, Steve, really made the club a success. So thank you for all those years of entertaining, and we're still doing some gigs together, which is fun.
I was going to say, I'm writing material right now, so hopefully you'll put something together, and I'll be able to get on the bill and at some point, and I appreciate a fundraiser or whatever.
Oh yeah, and I appreciate you doing the podcast, because this is our little historical piece to share with audiences, young and old, about stand-up comedy in the 90s and moving forward. And somebody like you is a great example of doing it correctly. So thank you.
Well, sure. Nice to enjoy good memories together. That's for sure. So all right. Here's onward and upward. All right.
Well, thanks so much, Steve. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we hope you enjoyed this podcast. I'm sure you did. And I know you liked the comedy set by Mr. Bruner. And if you get a chance. There'll be another new show next week. Steve, take
Enjoy
care.
it.
We'll be talking soon. Thanks
Absolutely.
for listening, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. For information on the show, merchandise, and our sponsors, or to send comments to Scott, visit our website at www.standupyourhostandmc.com. Look for more episodes soon and enjoy the world of stand-up comedy. Visit a comedy showroom near you.